Case 1, Beau Lamar Condon. On the morning of February 19, 2024, a police officer's service gun became the instrument of an unthinkable betrayal, one that would send massive shockwaves through an entire nation. Beau Lamar Condon was never meant to be a headline. As a New South Wales police constable, he had sworn to protect and serve, but behind the badge and uniform stood a man consumed by jealousy and rejection, driven by an obsession that would spark Australia's most shocking police scandal in decades. Before putting on the uniform, Lamar Condon had built a very different public profile as a celebrity blogger, mingling with stars and covering lavish events across Sydney. He deeply craved attention, connection, and validation. When he started dating Jessie Baird, a charismatic 26-year-old television host for Network 10, it seemed like a perfect match. But relationships built on pure intensity often crumble under pressure. When Baird ended the relationship, Lamar Condon refused to let go. Jessie moved on, finding new happiness with Luke Davies, a 29-year-old Qantas flight attendant whose warmth and kindness made him beloved by everyone he knew. The couple was busy building a life together in Jessie's Paddington home, a trendy inner-city neighborhood famous for its terrace houses and tight-knit community. For most people, seeing an ex find new love hurts, but it eventually fades. For Lamar Condon, it turned into an all-consuming fixation. He watched from the shadows as Jessie and Luke's romance blossomed, his resentment festering daily. Then came that dark Monday morning in February. Lamar Condon arrived at the Paddington home armed with his service Glock pistol, a state-issued weapon meant to protect innocent lives. What took place inside those walls would deeply horrify the investigators. He shot Jessie Baird and Luke Davies, ending their young lives in a calculated act of violence fueled by pure rage. But the horror was far from over. In a desperate attempt to cover his tracks, he stuffed both bodies into surfboard bags, an eerily casual choice that revealed his cold, calculated detachment. He loaded them into a van and drove southwest, far away from the bright city lights where someone might notice them. His destination was a remote rural property near Bungonia, about 200 kilometers from Sydney, surrounded by dense bushland. It was the perfect place to bury a secret. Lamar Condon dumped the bodies and went back to his normal life, hoping nobody would ever find them. But paranoia has a way of slowly eating at even the most calculated minds. Terrified of being caught, he returned days later and moved the bodies, hiding them in another spot on the sprawling property. It was a frantic decision, driven by a man completely unraveling under the crushing weight of his actions. Meanwhile, Jessie and Luke's sudden disappearance instantly triggered alarm bells. Loved ones knew something was catastrophically wrong. Neither of them would ever vanish without a word. Police launched an investigation, and as they dug deeper, inconsistencies emerged. Lamar Condon's connection to Jessie couldn't be ignored, and his behavior after the murders raised major red flags, prompting detectives to quickly secure warrants. They traced phone records and followed digital breadcrumbs that pointed straight to the celebrity blogger turned cop. The breakthrough came when investigators uncovered evidence linking Lamar Condon's movements to that rural property. Faced with mounting proof, he finally led detectives to where he had hidden the bodies near Bungonia. The grim discovery plunged Australia into deep grief and fury. This was no ordinary double homicide. It was a massive betrayal of public trust on an unimaginable scale. An officer of the law, trusted with authority and a deadly weapon, had used those exact tools to commit intimate violence. The case marked the first suspected murder by an active New South Wales police officer in decades, sparking urgent national debates about police gun storage, domestic violence in the ranks, and how someone capable of such brutality had slipped through the cracks. Lamar Condon was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. The legal proceedings gripped the nation, with media outlets dissecting every dark detail of the case. In October 2025, he pleaded not guilty, setting the stage for a trial in September 2026. Experts predicted a fierce courtroom battle, with prosecutors ready to present forensic evidence and digital records painting a damning picture. The defense would face a massive, uphill battle. How do you defend someone who literally led police to the hidden bodies? As Lamar Condon sits in custody, awaiting his trial, the families of Jessie Baird and Luke Davies continue to grapple with the loss of 2 vibrant young lives. One was a rising media star, the other, a dedicated aviation professional, both taken from the world by someone who refused to accept rejection. Their tragic deaths sparked nationwide mourning, reigniting fierce debates about police officers having access to guns. Memorial services drew hundreds of heartbroken mourners, and social media flooded with tributes celebrating their love and the incredible light they brought to everyone they touched. The upcoming trial will force the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about power, obsession, and the darkness behind a badge. But if an officer can weaponize his authority for revenge, what happens when terror strikes in broad daylight as the world watches helplessly? Case 2, Man Heron Monis. In Sydney's financial district, power suits rush past glass towers as espresso machines hum with the usual morning urgency. On December 15, 2014, a cafe became a prison, trapping 17 innocent people in a terrorist's deadly live broadcast game. Man Heron Monis called himself a cleric, a spiritual leader, and a man of faith, but the truth was far more sinister. Born in Iran, he arrived in Australia in 1996 as a refugee, quickly reinventing himself as a sheikh who offered spiritual counseling. He wore religious robes, grew a long beard, and carefully built an image of piety that masked a dark reality. But behind closed doors, Monis had a violent past and a growing list of enemies, once even charged as an accessory to the gruesome murder of his ex-wife, who was stabbed and set on fire in a Western Sydney stairwell. He had faced dozens of charges for sending offensive letters to the families of fallen Australian soldiers, cruelly taunting them over the painful sacrifices of their lost loved ones. He faced multiple charges of indecent and violent assault against women seeking his guidance. Yet somehow, incredibly, he was still free on bail. It was a bureaucratic failure that would soon lead to catastrophe. That Monday morning, Monis walked into the Lint Cafe in Martin Place, carrying a shotgun hidden inside a blue bag. With its massive windows overlooking the busy plaza, the cafe was packed with professionals grabbing their morning coffee before work. Around 9:45, Monis pulled out the weapon, taking 17 hostages. Customers, staff, and managers suddenly found themselves trapped in a terrifying, inescapable nightmare. Monis forced several terrified hostages to stand against the windows, holding up a black flag with white Arabic writing. That haunting image would be forever seared into Australia's memory. He broadcast live on every news channel while police surrounded the building and the nation held its breath. For 16 agonizing hours, tense negotiations dragged on. Monis made rambling, incoherent demands that changed hourly. He demanded to speak with the Prime Minister and wanted an Islamic State flag delivered. He wanted the entire world to hear his grievances, his anger, and his twisted ideology. Inside, the hostages desperately tried to stay calm, some even plotting escape when opportunities arose. 5 hostages managed to flee in the first few hours, followed by another group later that afternoon. Each escape was a vital victory, but 12 people remained trapped with an increasingly unstable armed gunman. When night fell, the situation grew worse. Police worked tirelessly, but Monis became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. His demands grew stranger, his behavior far more threatening. Exhausted and terrified, the hostages wondered if they would ever see sunrise. Then, at 2:13 a.m. on December 16th, violence erupted. Inside the cafe, Monis forced 34-year-old manager Tory Johnson to kneel before shooting him in the back of the head. That gunshot triggered an immediate police response. Tactical officers stormed the cafe, heavy gunfire erupting in the tight space as they moved to neutralize the threat. When the smoke cleared, 3 people were dead. Tory Johnson had been killed in a deliberate act of violence, along with 38-year-old barrister Katrina Dawson, a mother of 3 who was simply grabbing a morning coffee, tragically struck by police bullet fragments during the crossfire. Monis was also dead, shot by tactical officers. The siege was over, but it left Australia deeply traumatized after watching helplessly as innocent people were taken hostage in the heart of Sydney. The aftermath brought a painful mix of grief, anger, and soul-searching questions. How was someone facing such severe criminal charges ever granted bail? Why were the warnings ignored? And what systemic failures allowed Monis to slip through the cracks? Investigations exposed a perfect storm of bureaucratic failures, separate courts acting blindly on separate charges, and an overwhelmed, underfunded bail system. Security agencies knew about Maurice, but failed to connect the dots for any real intervention. Yet the siege also sparked something entirely unexpected. The hashtag I'll ride with you went viral, with locals offering to accompany Muslim commuters to shield them from backlash. It became a moment of deep compassion amid horror, a total rejection of the gunman's hatred. Multiple inquiries followed, scrutinizing every decision made before and during the ordeal. The years-long coronial inquest heard from survivors, police, and tactical experts who dissected the 16-hour ordeal minute by minute. Fierce debate over police tactics during the assault triggered massive reviews of hostage protocols. The results were complex and painful. Some decisions were justified, others questionable, but ultimately, everyone was trying to save lives in an impossible situation. Both Tory Johnson and Katrina Dawson were mourned as heroes. Tory was remembered for his courage in trying to shield others, while Katrina was simply in the wrong place at the absolute worst time. Their families created foundations in their names, turning profound grief into positive change. Today, memorial plaques stand at Martin Place, and every December, the nation pauses to remember when terror struck the heart of Sydney. The Lint Cafe siege proved how a single dangerous man, slipping through administrative gaps, could hold an entire nation hostage with sheer audacity. But what happens when danger does not announce itself with guns and hostages? Hiding behind a teacher's desk, a wedding ring, and decades of calculated lies. Case 3. Chris Dawson. Some disappearances happen in a sudden violent flash, leaving scattered clues like broken puzzle pieces. Others unfold in plain sight, hidden behind quiet smiles, taking 40 years to finally unravel. Chris Dawson was everything a small community admired. He was a former professional rugby player who traded the field for the classroom, working as a beloved physical education teacher at Cromer High School on Sydney's northern beaches. Tall, athletic, and charismatic, he was a man parents trusted with their kids, and neighbors waved to on quiet suburban streets. Chris married his high school sweetheart, Lynette, building what looked like an enviable life in the suburbs of Bayview, a quiet waterfront suburb where sailboats peacefully dotted the harbor. Families barbecued on sunny weekends. With 2 young daughters and a lovely home, their world seemed completely flawless from the outside. But perfection is often just a mask, and Chris Dawson was keeping a dark secret that would soon shatter everything. What began with crossed lines soon spiraled into a full-blown affair. She started babysitting his daughters, slowly weaving herself into his home life while his wife remained completely blind to the betrayal unfolding under her own roof. By late 1981, Lynette uncovered the truth. Friends later remembered her absolute devastation. She fought desperately to hold her crumbling marriage together. She slowly realized her husband's love had shifted to a girl barely older than a child. Chris wanted out of his marriage, but despised the thought of divorce, custody battles, and losing his pristine reputation. So around January 8, 1982, 33-year-old Lynette Dawson vanished from her Bayview home without a trace. She left behind her 2 young daughters, her purse, her clothes, and absolutely everything else that mattered. Chris claimed she had simply walked away from her family, perhaps joining some religious cult to start fresh somewhere new. His story was incredibly weak, but with no body or proof of foul play, investigators had nothing to go on. What happened next was almost as disturbing as her sudden disappearance. Within days, possibly 48 hours, Chris moved his teenage student into the house. She slept in Lynette's bed, wore her clothes, and played mother to her little girls. Neighbors were shocked. Relatives grew suspicious. Yet Chris kept repeating his story with absolute confidence, insisting that Lynette had walked out on her own. He claimed she called to say she was fine and just needed space. Years passed, then decades. How could Lynette Dawson remain missing while Chris married JC and simply kept teaching as if nothing had happened? The case went cold, leaving investigators deeply frustrated because they knew what happened but simply could not prove it. Lynette's body was never found. Without any physical evidence, putting together a case for trial seemed completely impossible. Then in 2018, something extraordinary happened. A true crime podcast called The Teacher's Pet reignited public interest in this decades-old mystery. Journalist Hedley Thomas carefully investigated every single angle, interviewing witnesses, uncovering fresh testimony, and exposing the exact timeline of Chris's relationship with JC. The podcast exploded globally, racking up millions of downloads, and suddenly the entire world was paying attention to Lynette Dawson's disappearance. The pressure worked. Police were now armed with fresh witness statements and years of built-up circumstantial evidence. Police arrested Chris Dawson in December 2018 at his home on Queensland's Gold Coast. He was 70 years old, a grandfather living a quiet retirement. But his dark past had finally caught up. Charged with taking his wife's life, Dawson firmly maintained his innocence, insisting Lynette had abandoned their family on her own. His lawyers argued that without a body or forensic evidence, a conviction was impossible. The prosecution strongly disagreed. The trial in 2022 was one of Australia's most closely watched legal battles in years, decided by a judge alone to avoid jury bias from the podcast. It lasted for months, as prosecutors built a damning timeline: Dawson's affair with a student, and Lynette's threats to expose him, then her sudden disappearance, followed immediately by JC moving in, and his constantly shifting stories about where his wife went. Witness after witness testified that Lynette would never abandon her girls, that she was planning a legal divorce, and that she feared for her safety. In August 2022, Justice Ian Harrison delivered his final verdict, finding Dawson guilty of murder. The judge ruled that Chris Dawson took his wife's life to clear a path for his affair with JC, confirming that Lynette had not walked away voluntarily and that despite having no body, the mountain of circumstantial evidence pointed to just one single conclusion. Dawson was sentenced to 24 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 18 years. This conviction marked a historic milestone, proving that justice could still be achieved even decades down the road. Today, Chris Dawson remains behind bars, still fighting his conviction on appeal while continuing to claim he did nothing wrong. For Lynette's family, 40 years of agonizing grief and uncertainty ended with the official confirmation that she had never abandoned them. She had been stolen by the very man who promised to cherish her. Meanwhile, this case completely transformed true crime media, proving how deep investigative journalism can breathe new life into cold cases and force authorities to reopen seemingly unsolvable mysteries. For Lynette's daughters, now grown up with their own families, the verdict brought a bittersweet peace, validating their mother's memory while sending their father away forever. Yet, while Dawson's crimes quietly unfolded in suburban Sydney, another predator was actively hunting along Australia's highways, turning a beautiful forest into a graveyard that would shock the world. Case 4. Evan Milet. In September 1992, two joggers running through Belanglo State Forest stumbled upon a discovery that would turn this beautiful bushland into a symbol of absolute horror. The dense forest, thick with massive trees, stretched across thousands of acres south of Sydney, making it a popular getaway for campers and hikers escaping city life. But hidden deep beneath that thick canopy, among the undergrowth and fallen branches, lay dark secrets that would soon shock the nation. That morning, the joggers spotted a partially buried body, lying face down with its hands tied behind its back. Within hours, investigators uncovered a second body just 30 meters away. Dental records quickly identified them as Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters, two 21-year-old British backpackers who had vanished months earlier while hitchhiking across New South Wales. The condition of their remains painted a picture of absolute, unimaginable brutality. Walters had been stabbed 14 times with enough force to sever her spine, while Clark had been shot 10 times in the head at close range. Fear instantly rippled through the local backpacking community. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, Australia was a prime destination for young travelers seeking adventure, drawn by its beautiful landscapes, welcoming locals, and the freedom of hitchhiking coast to coast. But now, something incredibly sinister was waiting out there along those highways. This grim discovery triggered a massive police operation, as detectives began combing through missing persons reports and uncovering highly disturbing patterns. A string of young travelers vanished after hitching rides with strangers, last spotted near the shadows of Banglo Forest on the Hume Highway. The investigation went cold for 13 months until October 1993, when a local gathering firewood stumbled upon skeletal remains deep in the woods. Police arrived and soon uncovered a second set of bones nearby. The bones belonged to Deborah Everest and James Gibson, both 19, who vanished hitchhiking to a festival in 1989. Panic set in. Police established Task Force Air, assigning more than 20 elite detectives to manage the massive manhunt. Just weeks later, in November 1993, the Dark Woods surrendered 3 more bodies. First was Simone Schmid, a 21-year-old German traveler missing since January 1991. Her body bore at least 8 brutal stab wounds, many deep enough to pierce her vital organs. Days later, searchers found German couple Anna Habshed and Gabor Nogebau, both in their early 20s. They had vanished on Boxing Day 1991. The killer's cruelty had escalated. Habshed was decapitated. Her head was never found despite massive searches, while Nogebau was shot 6 times in the face. All 7 shared a grim pattern. Each victim had been hitchhiking and was picked up along the Hume Highway, then driven into Banglo Forest, where they met a terrible fate. Found face down with hands bound, they were covered in leaves and branches. Someone had tried to hide them, but failed to finish the job. With 7 bodies but 0 leads, investigators were stuck until a massive breakthrough cracked the entire mystery wide open. From across the world, a British tourist named Paul Onions called with a terrifying story. 3 years earlier, in January 1990, he was hitchhiking from Sydney when a friendly driver named Bill offered him a lift. The conversation started normally, but soon Bill's questions grew deeply unsettling. His warm smile vanished, replaced by pure malice. Just a kilometer from Banglo Forest, Bill pulled out a revolver, and declared it was a robbery. Onions bolted straight into oncoming traffic, waving down a passing motorist who drove him to safety. He had reported the attack to local authorities back then, but the paperwork was filed away and forgotten. Detectives pulled the archived report and found details matching the forest crime scenes. Then, another crucial tip came in. An anonymous caller urged them to look at a local hunter, a man completely obsessed with high-powered firearms. His name was Ivan Milet. Born in 1944 to a large immigrant family, he was one of 14 children raised in a strict, isolated home. He spent 20 years working as a road construction laborer, blending into quiet working-class suburbs while hiding deeply sadistic desires. Investigators realized Miot had a brother named Bill, the exact name the hitchhiker had given to police. When Paul Onions flew back to Australia for a photo lineup, he immediately pointed out Ivan Miot as his attacker. On May 22, 1994, 50 heavily armed officers surrounded Miot's home in Eagle Vale. What they found was described by police as an Aladdin's cave of stolen goods. A mountain of items linking him directly to every single victim. They found rifles matching the murder weapons, camping gear stolen from the backpackers, and cameras belonging to the dead. There were sleeping bags, clothes, and even foreign cash from the homelands of the slain travelers. Milet had collected trophies, dark souvenirs of his horrific crimes, showing a brazen arrogance, confident he would never face justice. Hit with 7 counts of murder and the attack on Paul Onions, Milet adamantly maintained his innocence with cold conviction. The trial opened in March 1996, lasting 18 grueling weeks. Prosecutors presented over 600 photos and called 145 witnesses, building a circumstantial case so massive it spoke for itself. Milet's defense lawyers tried to blame his brothers, desperately seeking to cast doubt on who actually pulled the trigger. But the physical evidence was undeniable: the victim's gear found in his house, the ballistic matches, and the eyewitness positive identification sealed his fate. On July 27, 1996, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge handed Milet 7 consecutive life sentences, ensuring he would die behind bars. He received 18 more years for his crimes against Paul Onions. The monster who haunted Australia's highways was destined to spend his remaining days locked in maximum security. Even behind bars, Milet remained utterly defiant. After a failed 1997 escape attempt, he launched hunger strikes, refusing to confess or express any remorse. Detectives strongly suspected he had taken many more lives, young travelers who vanished along lonely Australian highways, never to be found. Without confessions or fresh evidence, those cases remained unsolved mysteries. On October 27, 2019, Ivan Mallet died in prison from cancer at age 74, taking his dark, lingering secrets straight to the grave. He died exactly as he lived, asserting his innocence, showing no regret, and denying grieving families any sense of closure. These horrific backpacker murders shattered Australia's sense of safety, effectively ending hitchhiking as a carefree way to travel. Once a peaceful getaway, the Langlo State Forest became synonymous with pure evil. Its beautiful trails were permanently stained by the terrifying events that unfolded there. Today, a quiet memorial plaque stands in those woods, bearing the names of 7 young souls murdered while chasing adventure: Carolyn, Joanne, Deborah, James, Simone, Gabber, and Anja. While Milot hunted on lonely highways and in dark forests, another monster operated in plain sight, right inside a family home, wiping out an entire household in one single night of unspeakable violence. Case 5. Robert C. Sometimes the deadliest betrayal comes not from a stranger in the shadows, but from a trusted family member sitting across the dinner table every Friday night. Robert appeared to be living the ideal immigrant dream. Born Lin Bin Shi in China, he trained as an ear, nose, and throat specialist before moving to Australia with his wife, Kathy, in 2006, chasing better opportunities and a fresh start. The couple first settled in Melbourne before relocating to Sydney's North Epping suburb. They lived just 200 meters from Kathy's brother Min Lin and his family. On paper, their future looked incredibly bright. He had a medical degree, a supportive family, and a new country full of endless possibilities. But beneath the surface, a bitter envy was quietly festering. Min had built a successful life that highlighted everything Robert lacked. Running a successful news agency in Epping, Min generated over $1 million every year, providing a comfortable life for his wife, Lily, their 2 young sons, Henry and Terry, and Lily's sister, Irene, who stayed with them. The Lins owned several properties worth over $2 million, representing real prosperity and achievement within their tight-knit Chinese community. Meanwhile, Robert's attempts to establish himself here had utterly collapsed. His Melbourne restaurant venture failed miserably, stripping away the high professional status he once held in China. While Min was hailed as a hard-working success, Robert became the struggling brother-in-law of former doctor banned from practicing medicine, forced to watch others thrive while he slowly faltered. Every Friday night, the extended family met at the home of Min and Kathy's elderly parents for traditional pork and sticky rice dinners. Attendance was mandatory, a vital way to keep family bonds and traditions alive. On Friday, July 17, 2009, the Lin family gathered as usual, sharing food and laughs before heading home around 10 o'clock that evening. Min, Lily, Henry, Terry, and Irene headed to their Boundary Road home for a peaceful night's sleep. But a killer had other plans. In the quiet morning hours of July 18th, an intruder slipped into the unlocked house, armed with a hammer-like weapon. What unfolded next was methodical carnage. 45-year-old Min was attacked first in his bed, struck repeatedly with brutal, devastating force. Lily, 43, suffered the exact same brutal fate right beside her husband. Creeping further into the house, the killer targeted Irene next, continuing his relentless and savage assault. Finally, the monster turned on 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry, hunting them in their bedrooms and silencing them forever. The killer systematically wiped out the entire family to ensure no one could raise an alarm or escape. Around 9 that same morning, anxious customers began gathering outside the family news agency, wondering why the doors remained shut. Concerned calls about her brother's sudden absence prompted Kathy and Robert to quickly drive over to the Boundary Road home to investigate. Pushing open the unlocked front door, they stepped directly into a scene of unimaginable horror. Blood was sprayed across bedroom walls, 5 bodies lay completely still, and a family home had become a slaughterhouse. Kathy sobbed as she called emergency services, struggling to explain what she had just found. Paramedics rushed to the home in minutes, but they were already too late. All 5 victims had been dead for hours. The sole survivor of the immediate family was 15-year-old Brenda Lynn. She was away on a school trip to New Caledonia with Cheltenham Girls High School. She discovered the horrific news of her family's murder through Facebook messages while overseas, returning home to find her entire world completely shattered. Robert and Kathy stepped in as her legal guardians. They took over the family news agency and gave Brenda a home, while police launched Strikeforce Norburn to run the massive murder investigation. Detectives methodically sifted through the evidence. The crime scene yielded 24 bloody footprints from size 9.5 Asics sneakers, pointing to a lone attacker. The victims had been bludgeoned with a hammer-like tool, and several also showed signs of asphyxiation. There was no sign of forced entry, meaning the killer either had a key or the family had left the door unlocked. Months passed with still no arrests made. Pressure mounted on police to solve the high-profile case that had terrified suburban Sydney. Investigators chased every lead and interviewed dozens of people, but the real breakthrough finally came through surveillance and forensic science. In May 2010, police informed Kathy about bloody footprints matching Asics sneakers found at the crime scene. Soon after, undercover surveillance caught Robert cutting up a size 9.5 Asics shoebox and flushing the pieces down his toilet. It was highly suspicious behavior for a man who claimed to be entirely innocent. More surveillance revealed that Robert had scrubbed his garage clean on the very morning the bodies were found. When forensic investigators later secured search warrants for his property, they found a tiny bloodstain hidden under furniture in that same garage. DNA testing confirmed it contained genetic material from 4 of the 5 victims. On May 5, 2011, nearly 2 years after the brutal murders, 47-year-old Robert Z. was arrested at his North Epping home. Police charged him with 5 counts of murder, claiming his motives were rooted in jealousy, a severe loss of faith within his cultural community, greed for the family's assets, and an obsession with his young niece Brenda. Prosecutors would also present damning testimony from jailhouse informants who claimed Robert spoke of buying a hammer from cheap stores with poor security cameras, using martial arts pressure points to paralyze his victims, and framing others by planting DNA evidence. The legal battle that followed became incredibly messy. Robert's first trial in 2013 was aborted when new evidence surfaced. A second trial in 2014 also fell apart. His third trial in 2015 dragged on for 9 grueling months, only to end with a hung jury after 11 days of deliberation. Even when told an 11-to-1 majority verdict would suffice, the jurors could not reach an agreement. Shockingly, Robert was released on bail in December 2015, after spending nearly 5 years locked up without a conviction, as the court ruled his long detention was unfair. The fourth and final trial began in June 2016. Once again, the jury struggled to reach a unanimous verdict, but Justice Elizabeth Fullerton declared a majority verdict would suffice. On January 12, 2017, the jury found him guilty on all 5 murder charges by an 11-to-1 vote. At his sentencing on February 13, 2017, Robert stood up and declared, "I did not murder the Lynn family. I am innocent." Weeping beside him, his wife Kathy echoed his cries. To this day, she has never stopped defending her husband's innocence. Justice Fullerton handed down 5 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole. Robert immediately appealed, challenging the DNA evidence and key jury instructions that formed the foundation of the prosecution's case. Those appeals were thrown out in February 2021. He remains behind bars, still maintaining his innocence. Meanwhile, Brenda Lynn, now an adult and an advocate for survivors, has spoken out about the inappropriate behavior she endured from her uncle while living under his roof. This devastating case exposed how dark envy can poison family bonds, turning simple dinners into a prelude to unspeakable horror. Yet, even as Robert Z's terrible crimes shattered one family in suburban Sydney, another predator was actively hunting in those very same forests, where Mala had stalked victims years before, proving that evil often returns to familiar ground. Case 6. Daniel Hold. In July 2015, drivers on a lonely South Australian highway spotted a worn-out suitcase dumped on the shoulder. What lay inside would finally crack a cold case 5 years in the making. Carly Pierce Stevenson was 20 years old when she left Alice Springs in late 2008, bringing her toddler Kendall and boyfriend Daniel Hold. Raised in the red center of the Northern Territory, Carly had a big network of family and friends who absolutely adored her and her blonde toddler. Her mother Colleen, grandmother Connie, and her aunts Sharon, and many others watched Carly grow into a loving young mother who lit up every room she walked into. So when Carly announced she was leaving town with Hold, a man she had only been dating for 2 months, the sudden move shocked everyone. In reality, Daniel Hold had only just arrived in Alice Springs with another girlfriend, Hazel Passmore, and her 3 kids. But loyalty meant nothing to someone with Holdy's history. Born in 1974, he led a nomadic life, drifting between caravan parks and cheap rentals across several Australian states. His criminal past told a truly dark story. There were assault charges from 1999, when he tried to strangle a girlfriend and smother her, alongside domestic violence reports spanning several jurisdictions, drug crimes, and a long pattern of terrorizing women that went back years. But Carly had no idea how deep his darkness ran when they first got together. She saw a charming guy, someone promising new adventures, far beyond Alice Springs' dusty streets. In December 2008, Carly, her toddler Kendall, and Hold traveled south, stopping briefly in Adelaide, where Hazel was hospitalized after a bad car crash, before they continued on to Canberra. They stayed with Holdy's cousins, Christine and Derek, who would later become key witnesses. On the night of December 14th, the hosts heard Carly and Hold arguing viciously over money. The next morning, December 15th, the couple drove off in Carly's car, heading straight toward the Belanglo State Forest, the notorious location where serial killer Ivan Milat had buried 7 backpackers years earlier. What happened next in those woods was pure, depraved evil. Hold turned on Carly with savage brutality, crushing her throat with his boot, fracturing her larynx, and killing her through blunt force trauma. He then knelt on her chest so hard that he shattered her ribs. The horror did not stop there. He desecrated her body in unspeakable ways, snapping trophy photos to document his crimes. Finally, he poured gasoline over her remains and set them on fire, trying to destroy any evidence before burying her under the eucalyptus trees. But Hold was not done. 4 days later, on December 19th, he drove young Kendall to Narrandera, a country town in New South Wales. On the way, he stopped at a supermarket to buy duct tape and heavy garbage bags, preparing for his next horrific act. Prosecutors would later reveal that Hold had planned to commit deeply disturbing, unspeakable acts against the innocent toddler. Inside a motel room, he stuffed heavy cloths into the 2-year-old's mouth, wound thick duct tape from her chin up to her eyes, wrapped a diaper around her head, and suffocated her. He packed her tiny body into a suitcase and drove to South Australia, dumping it off the highway where it lay hidden for 7 years. Then came the most calculated phase of Holdy's crimes, the elaborate cover-up. Armed with Carly's phone and personal documents, he built a chilling illusion that mother and child were still alive and well. He texted her family, claiming Carly just wanted space, that she was traveling and fine but simply needed some distance. When Carly's mother filed a missing persons report in September 2009, she got back reassuring texts supposedly from her daughter. That report was actually withdrawn just 5 days later, after police assured Colleen that Carly was safe but just lying low. Meanwhile, Hold cleaned out Carly's bank accounts, stealing over $70,000 through fraudulent ATM withdrawals and welfare benefits. He even got Hazel Passmore to impersonate Carly at a credit union in 2010, cementing the sick illusion. In 2010, trail bike riders discovered skeletal remains in the Belanglo State Forest. Forensic tests quickly ruled out Ivan Milat. He had been behind bars long before these bones were left there. Detectives named the unidentified woman Angel after a t-shirt found with her body that read Angelic. They released a facial reconstruction in 2011, begging the public for help, but the leads dried up and the case went cold, leaving Angel's true identity a mystery for 5 years. For agonizing years, her family believed she was still alive, simply choosing not to contact them. The breakthrough came on a July day in 2015, when a suitcase was discovered beside a South Australian highway. Inside, investigators uncovered the skeletal remains of a young child and clothing and a distinctive handmade quilt. After authorities launched public appeals, a woman named Tanya contacted Crime Stoppers with information that changed everything. Forensic biologist Kara Wilson extracted DNA from both sets of remains, the unidentified woman from Belanglo and the child from the suitcase. The results were stunning. They were mother and daughter. The angel of Belanglo was Carly Pierce Stevenson, and the child was little Condoleezza. Suddenly, Carly's family understood the horrifying truth. Those text messages, those reassurances, were all lies. Carly had been gone since December 2008, taken violently in a forest while her daughter waited nearby, unaware her own fate was sealed days later. On October 28, 2015, police arrested Daniel Holdom in Cessnock, New South Wales. He was 41 years old and already serving time for another heinous crime. In 2014, he had been convicted of committing terrible acts against a 9-year-old girl. Authorities charged him with both murders. The case built against Holdom was overwhelming. Witnesses came forward describing his history of violence toward Carly, including confessions he had made about stomping on her throat and crushing her windpipe. Mobile phone records placed him at Belanglo Forest around the time of Carly's death. The handmade quilt found with Gallese was traced back to Carly's family. Forensic evidence confirmed the brutal injuries. In July 2018, facing 42 volumes of evidence and testimony from 5 key witnesses, Holdom pleaded guilty to both counts. On the morning of his November 2018 sentencing, he attempted to withdraw his guilty plea for Galles's murder. But Justice Robert Allan Hume denied the request after a brief adjournment. The judge's words during sentencing captured the enormity of the crimes. He described Carly's treatment as showing complete disdain for her human existence, noting that to him she was just flesh, with a life that could be extinguished for his vile pleasure. The attack on Gallese was labeled despicable, of extreme gravity and appalling depravity. Justice Hume imposed 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, declaring that Holdom, for the foreseeable future, represents a danger to society. The courtroom erupted in applause as the sentence was read. Carly's family finally had answers, though they came far too late for her mother, Colleen, who passed away from cancer in 2012, still believing her daughter was alive but estranged. Carly's stepfather, Scott, spoke of the anguish of watching Colleen die, while being angry at Carly for not calling, not knowing she had been gone all along. Today, Daniel Holdom remains imprisoned, having recently filed an appeal claiming his sentences are manifestly excessive. An audacious move, given the unfathomable cruelty of his actions. The case of Carly and Gallese serves as a devastating reminder of how easily predators can hide behind charm, and of how easily vulnerable people can disappear, and how technology can be weaponized to maintain deadly deceptions. But while Holdom's violence targeted strangers he had recently met, another killer turned his rage on the people who should have been safest, his own children, weaponizing them in an act of ultimate revenge. Case 7. Robert Farquharson. Father's Day 2005 should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the setting for one of Australia's most devastating acts of familial annihilation. Robert Farquharson was born in 1969 and grew up to become an unremarkable man, living an unremarkable life in Winchelsea, a small town in Victoria's southwest. He met Cindy Gambino in February 1990, and they built what appeared to be a solid relationship. Marriage followed, then children, 3 boys who became the center of their world. 10-year-old Jai was the eldest, thoughtful, and responsible beyond his years. 7-year-old Tyler brought energy and laughter everywhere, while 2-year-old Bailey was still discovering the world with wide-eyed wonder. For years, the Farquharson family seemed content, attending community events, sharing meals, creating memories that should have lasted lifetimes. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Robert and Cindy's marriage deteriorated slowly at first, then catastrophically, with Cindy later describing their relationship as complicated and Robert displaying what she called a love-hate relationship with their sons. By the time they separated, bitterness had replaced whatever affection once existed between them. Robert spiraled after the divorce, especially when Cindy moved on with Stephen Mules and rebuilt her life. Friends watched his bitterness fester as his complaints grew more constant and venomous. He hated paying child support and loathed that she kept the newer car in the split. He hated her joy while his own life stalled. 2 months before Father's Day, Robert stood outside a fish and chip shop talking to his friend, a bus driver named Greg King. According to King's later testimony, Robert spoke coldly of revenge, talking about hurting Cindy where it would wound her the deepest. When asked what he meant, Robert said he wanted to destroy what mattered most to her. He meant Jai, Tyler, and Bailey. King would remember those words with terror that September. Father's Day fell on Sunday, September 4th, 2005. Robert had the boys for his scheduled weekend visit, picking them up early for what should have been a fun day. Around 7 in the evening, as darkness fell over rural Victoria, Robert drove along the Prince's Highway near Winchell with all 3 boys strapped into his sedan. A witness named Dawn Waite was the last person to see that car before tragedy struck. She passed Robert's sedan, but as she checked her rearview mirror, she saw something strange. The car suddenly veered sharp right, as if the driver finally spotted the exact turnoff he wanted. She thought nothing of it until she watched the evening news. Robert's car veered off the road and plunged into a 7.5-meter deep farm dam. The vehicle submerged quickly, filling with freezing, pitch-black water. Inside, 3 terrified kids fought against their seatbelts and the rising tide, wondering why their dad was not helping. Robert, however, escaped the drowning car, swimming to the surface and crawling onto the muddy bank. He stood there, arms crossed, watching his sons drown in the dark. Soon, a passing driver named Shane Atkinson found Robert on the roadside, drenched, claiming he had crashed. Atkinson offered to call for help twice, but Robert refused, demanding to be driven straight to Cindy's house in Winnelsea. When Cindy opened the door to her dripping ex-husband, he coldly said, "Matter of fact, I have had an accident. The boys are in the dam." Cindy's world shattered right there. Stephen Mules later faced the agonizing task of identifying the 3 little bodies pulled from the sunken car. Robert's defense was instant and unchanging. He claimed a severe coughing fit made him black out, and he only woke up as the sedan sank. He said little Jai tried to open the passenger door as water poured in, but the car sank too fast for him to save them. It was just a horrible, tragic accident, he insisted, but investigators did not buy it. After a 3-month investigation, police arrested Robert on December 14, 2005, charging him with 3 counts of murder. The prosecution's case grew stronger by the day. Cam Everett testified that 7 cars had crashed through his fence in 8 years, but only Robert's vehicle reached the water. Crash reconstruction experts proved the vehicle had been steered several times on its path from the highway directly to the dam, which was impossible for an unconscious driver. Senior Constable Glenn Urquhart testified about deliberate steering inputs that guided the sedan straight to the water, shattering Robert's blackout claim. Then came Greg King's devastating testimony about the conversation outside the shop, revealing the threats to steal what Cindy loved most. The prosecutor, Andrew Tinney, painted a dark picture of cold, calculated revenge. It is a bit of a coincidence that this tragedy happened to a man who threatened to make his wife pay. Tinney told the jury, "What a dreadfully, shockingly, unbelievably unlucky man. If he is not a cold-blooded killer who took 3 lives." The defense fought back with medical experts who diagnosed Robert with cough syncope, a rare condition causing blackouts after intense coughing. His sister, an aged care nurse, testified that she had seen him collapse before. Another inmate even claimed he saw Robert faint in his cell, breaking his leg during the fall. In 2007, Robert was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. But he won an appeal in December 2009, after judges ruled that the prosecution hid vital information about Greg King, who was facing criminal charges himself, meaning the trial's evidence had been deeply compromised. A new trial was granted, and Robert walked free on bail. In 2010, the second trial rehashed the same grim evidence: the crash reconstruction, the threats, the eyewitnesses, and his highly unbelievable story. On July 22, 2010, the jury found him guilty on all 3 counts. Justice Lex Lacy handed Robert a life sentence with a minimum of 33 years. The judge observed that his crimes had shattered countless lives. Those 3 young boys suffered a truly terrifying end. Hearing the sentence, Cindy Gambino Mules threw her fists up. While she felt the term was too short, Robert claimed innocence and launched several appeals. Every appeal failed. By 2024, he was pushing for another review under laws passed in 2019. That very year, the Victorian government took a truly unprecedented step. Department of Health Secretary Ewan Wallace stripped Robert of his rights to the gravesite, ensuring he would never lie beside the children he killed. They ground his name off the headstone, which had controversially labeled them as the cherished children of Robert Farquhar. The boys' stepfather, Stephen Mules, called the move a major victory for families shattered by violence. Cindy Gambino Mules, who rebuilt her life with Stephen and had 2 more sons, passed away in May 2022. Remembered as a warrior fighting for justice, Robert Farquharson remains locked inside Barwon Prison's maximum security unit, still claiming it was an accident, still playing the victim, while Jai, Tyler, and Bailey rest in graves he can never share. The tragedy showed how parental love can warp into toxic hatred when marriages fail, leaving innocent children as casualties in a war they never wanted. But while Farquharson's violence unfolded on a dark highway, let's look at another mystery that would haunt Australia for decades, one involving a newborn who vanished without a trace, and a mother with deep secrets. Case 8. Kelly Lane. On September 12, 1996, a healthy baby girl was born at Auburn Hospital in Western Sydney. Just 48 hours later, she vanished, sparking one of the country's most controversial criminal mysteries. Kelly Lane was born on March 21, 1975, into a respected manly family. Her mother, Sandra, worked at the local hospital, while her father, Robert, was a retired cop who ran the Manly Marlins rugby club. From early on, Kelly seemed destined for great things, excelling at water polo with a natural athletic talent that turned heads. She attended McKellar Girls High before a short stint at university. Though she dropped out to work part-time, she kept her focus on her true passion, becoming an elite water polo player. Her coaches described her as exceptionally driven and competitive, a player who pushed herself relentlessly. Friends knew her as outgoing, fun, and highly social, popular among Sydney's athletic crowds, where she mingled with rugby players and top athletes. But beneath that shiny surface, Kelly hid dark secrets that would eventually tear her life apart. Throughout the 1990s, she fell pregnant 5 times in just 7 years, hiding every single pregnancy from her family, friends, coaches, and her long-term partner, Duncan Gillese. The first 2 ended in terminations. The third resulted in a baby girl, born in 1995, whom Kelly put up for adoption. Her partner never suspected a thing. Kelly's ability to conceal her pregnancies was truly remarkable. She kept playing water polo and went out partying, showing up at family events without anyone ever noticing the changes in her body. Her 4th pregnancy reached full term in September 1996. After trying to get induced early at Ryde Hospital, Kelly finally gave birth to Tegan Lee Lane at 38 weeks at Auburn Hospital. Nurses logged everything as normal. A healthy baby girl of average weight who passed her health checks, fully cleared to leave with her mother. Around midday on September 14th, Kelly signed herself and baby Tegan out of the ward, walking out with the infant cradled in her arms. By 3 that afternoon, she walked into her parents' Manly home completely alone. No baby, no explanation, and not a single mention of Tegan. That very night, Kelly went to a wedding dressed in white, accompanied by Duncan Gillese. She posed for photos, danced, and laughed, showing absolutely no signs of distress. To everyone there, she was just normal Kelly, full of life, athletic, and having fun. Nobody suspected that hours earlier, she had walked out of a hospital with a baby who was now gone. The following day, Kelly slipped back into her daily routine as if nothing had happened. Little Tegan Lee Lane had simply ceased to exist. 3 long years passed before anyone questioned what happened to that baby. In 1999, 25 weeks pregnant with her 5th baby, Kelly flew to Queensland seeking a late-term termination. Denied the procedure because the pregnancy was too advanced, she carried the boy to term and put him up for adoption. While filling out the adoption paperwork, Kelly claimed this was her first child. A sharp-eyed social worker conducting routine checks discovered the lie. Records showed Kelly had given birth at Auburn Hospital in 1996. Deeper digging revealed she had also given birth in 1995. When confronted, Kelly flatly denied that these earlier children ever existed. Then she changed her story, claiming the daughter born in 1996 lived with a family in Perth. Police launched an investigation in late 1999. By February 2001, detectives interviewed a 7-month pregnant Kelly. During the interrogation, she offered her explanation for where Tegan was. She claimed she gave the baby to Tegan's father, Andrew Norris, or maybe Andrew Morris, she could not quite remember. She described him as a brief former flame who already had a partner. She allegedly handed Tegan over to them to raise. It sounded plausible, except for one massive problem. No one named Andrew Norris, or Maurice, matching her description, actually existed. Exhaustive police searches across multiple states turned up absolutely nothing. If this man existed, he left zero trace. An inquest from 2005 to 6 examined every detail of the disappearance. The coroner concluded that Tegan was dead, recommending that the police continue their investigation. In 2010, Kelly Lane faced trial in the Supreme Court, with prosecutor Marc-André leading the case. The prosecution presented a dark pattern of 5 pregnancies, all kept hidden through secrecy and lies. They argued she hid these pregnancies solely to protect her squeaky clean reputation and shielding herself from the harsh judgment that would follow exposure of her relationships with multiple rugby players. The prosecution's case was completely circumstantial. There was no body, no cause of death, no crime scene, and no confession. Instead, they relied on her lies, the phantom father, and her history of hiding pregnancies. They argued Kelly had a strong motive to save her promising sporting career, her public image, and her relationship with Duncan Gillespie. Prosecutors claimed she killed Tegan right after leaving the hospital before arriving at her parents' house, dumping the body in an unknown location. The defense insisted reasonable doubt existed. Maybe the child was with Andrew or had been informally adopted. Any number of innocent explanations could explain why she vanished. Kelly chose not to take the stand, exercising her legal right to remain silent. After a 6-month trial, on December 13, 2010, the jury found her guilty of murder by a majority vote and guilty of perjury by a unanimous decision. Justice Wheely later made highly unusual public remarks, admitting his own deep unease about whether the state had truly proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. Still, on April 15, 2011, Kelly was sentenced to 18 years behind bars with over 13 years non-parole, making her eligible for release on May 12, 2024. Appeals followed but failed. Her conviction stood despite intense public controversy. A 2018 television documentary exposed the case further, presenting new evidence. It questioned the police work, revealing that 163 local babies born back then remained completely unaccounted for. Legal experts and advocacy groups quickly demanded an urgent review of her conviction. The Bridge of Hope Innocence Initiative petitioned for an inquiry, arguing the evidence was incredibly thin. But in March 2024, as parole neared, she hit a wall. New South Wales knew no body, no parole laws. Passed in 2022. The State Parole Board officially denied her release, declaring they were not satisfied that she had cooperated honestly with police to find Tegan's body. Kelly still maintains her innocence from behind bars at Silverwater. She claims Tegan is alive somewhere, unaware of her true identity. She still hopes someone will bring forward evidence to prove her innocence, but the case remains highly divisive. Her supporters argue she is serving time for a crime with zero proof of death. They insist circumstantial evidence alone should never decide such a serious conviction. Critics point to her unbelievable story, the mystery father who never appeared, and a pattern of lies spanning years. The only absolute certainty is that Tegan Lee Lane was born, left Auburn Hospital, and vanished forever. Whether she is alive somewhere or died as a newborn remains one of Australia's deepest mysteries. Kelly Lane sits in prison, her golden sporting days long gone, her reputation ruined, still pleading her innocence while her daughter, dead or alive, remains completely lost nearly 3 decades later. But while Kelly Lane's case relied on a missing body, another Australian case saw a monster convicted of double murder without ever finding his victims, proving that even the darkest evil leaves a trail, no matter how carefully a killer tries to bury his tracks. Case 9. Bruce Burrell. Some predators hunt strangers in dark alleyways. Others wear expensive suits, mingle at dinner parties, and betray the very people who trust them most. Bruce Allen Burrell was born on January 25, 1953, crafting a respectable facade that hid a dark soul. He posed as a wealthy advertising executive, a man who dined at the finest restaurants, owned country estates, and moved effortlessly through Sydney's upper-middle-class social circles. But beneath that polished surface lurked a thief, a con man, and ultimately a ruthless killer who took 2 lives for money. Friends and colleagues saw only charm, but his victims realized too late the monster hiding behind that warm smile. Dorothy Davis was 74 years old in 1995, a wealthy widow living peacefully in Lurline Bay, an elite seaside suburb in Sydney's east. She had built a comfortable life centered around her beloved family and many close friends. Dorothy was generous to a fault, always ready to assist anyone she truly cared about. One of those people was Dallas Burrell, Bruce's wife, whom Dorothy had known since childhood and loved dearly. When Bruce approached Dorothy in 1994 for financial help to buy a new house, she didn't hesitate, loaning him $100,000. It was a private deal to help the Burrells without any strings attached. Dorothy trusted Bruce completely because of her close connection with Dallas, but Bruce had no intention of paying her back. He had been fired from several jobs for laziness and incompetence. His flashy lifestyle was nothing but a fake front built on constant manipulation and theft. By May 1995, Dorothy pressed Bruce for her money, growing tired of his endless excuses. The two had a fierce argument just days before May 30th, 1995. It was the last day anyone ever saw Dorothy Davis alive. On that Tuesday morning, Dorothy mentioned to a local builder that she was visiting a friend suffering from cancer. She walked away from her Lurline Bay home, expecting nothing more than a quick, routine visit. Instead, she was walking straight into a deadly trap. Detectives believe Bruce lured Dorothy to his home and took her life. The attack was likely sudden and brutal, leaving her no way to escape. Her remains were never recovered, though investigators strongly suspect Bruce hid her body at Hillydale, his rural property near Bungonia, or in the dense surrounding bushland. Dorothy Davis had simply vanished. At first, police didn't suspect foul play, assuming an elderly woman might have wandered off or suffered a medical emergency. But Dorothy wasn't sick or lost. She had been cold-bloodedly erased by the very person she tried to help. 2 years went by. Bruce kept up his lies, even as his finances hit rock bottom. In 1990, he worked for Bernie Whelan, the wealthy chief executive of Crown Equipment. Bernie eventually let Bruce go, but they remained on relatively friendly terms. Bernie's wife, Carrie, was a vibrant 39-year-old mother of 3 children, Sarah, Matthew, and James. Carrie split her time between their grand Kurrajong estate in the Hawkesbury and social events. She lived a blessed life, filled with family, security, and pure happiness. She met Bruce through her husband's business and considered him a friend. On May 6, 1997, Carrie drove out of a hotel parking lot at 9:38 in the morning. Witnesses saw her get into a Mitsubishi Pajarero 4-wheel drive, the same model Bruce Burrell drove. She never came home. 24 hours later, Bernie Wan received a chilling 2-page typed ransom note demanding $1 million for Carrie's safe return. "Follow all instructions or your wife will die," the note warned. "Any sign of police or interference, and she dies." Bernie nearly collapsed reading those devastating words. He was completely destroyed by shock, absolutely devastated. Those threatening lines soon sparked the biggest police manhunt in Australian history. Strike Force Belair took the lead, coordinating efforts to find Carrie and hunt down her captor. Investigators entered a tense, agonizing waiting game, hoping for any instructions on where to drop the cash. But total silence followed. Days bled into weeks, then months, and any hope of finding Carrie alive withered away. Detectives tore apart every single detail of Carrie's life, analyzing her routines and relationships. Soon, a surprising suspect emerged on their radar: Bruce Burrell. He was a former employee and supposed family friend, but once police dug into his background, his respectable reputation fell apart. They uncovered a history of lost jobs and massive crushing debts. He was a natural thief and liar. Suddenly, detectives connected him to Dorothy Davis, a rich widow who vanished 2 years prior after lending him money he never returned. The pattern was chillingly clear. Bruce Burrell targeted wealthy women he knew, making them vanish the second they stood in the way of his greed. In 1998, Bruce was locked up for 2.5 years for stealing 3 luxury cars. Behind bars, he was charged with kidnapping and murdering Carrie Whelan, though prosecutor Nicholas Cowie eventually dropped those charges. Bruce quickly released a statement, claiming he was thrilled and completely innocent. He even threatened a massive lawsuit against New South Wales for malicious prosecution. He bizarrely blamed a Sydney mobster with American mafia ties for Carrie's death. Classic Bruce Burrell, always shifting blame, never admitting a thing. In May 2002, a formal inquest looked into both disappearances. Bruce was one of 50 witnesses called. His ex-wife, Dallas, exposed him as a violent, controlling man who threatened her when they split. Phone records, bank statements, and piles of circumstantial evidence painted a damning picture. Police scoured the hilly Ale area and the thick Bangania wilderness, hunting for hidden graves or any trace of the women. They found nothing, yet the heavy evidence pointed straight to Bruce Burrell. In 2006, he was convicted of kidnapping and murdering Carrie, receiving a life sentence plus 16 years. The trial proved his sole motive was financial greed. He desperately hoped the ransom cash would solve his endless money struggles. In 2007, he stood trial for Dorothy Davis's murder, which prosecutors likened to a professional, contract-style execution. Justice David Kirby noted that while both crimes were calculated, Carrie Whelan's abduction required much more complex planning. Bruce was convicted and handed 28 years with a 21-year non-parole period. Stacked on top of his previous sentence, he was never getting out. He spent his remaining days locked up at Lithgow Correctional Center west of Sydney. He reportedly spent his time sewing funeral shrouds, a dark, ironic job for a man who destroyed 2 families. He maintained his innocence to the very end, stubbornly refusing to reveal where he hid the victims' bodies. On August 4, 2016, Bruce Allan Burrell died at age 63 from advanced lung cancer, complicated by severe heart disease. He died without ever confessing or showing remorse, cruelly denying 2 heartbroken families the simple peace of knowing where their loved ones lie. Carrie's son, Matthew, spoke of the heavy burden his family carried. He said his late father, Bernie, would have gladly let Bruce walk free just to bring his mother home. That uncertainty will always be a heavy burden, Matthew later reflected. Dorothy Davis's family shared that same torment, decades of absolute silence, unable to lay their mother and grandmother to rest. These tragic crimes helped inspire New South Wales' tough no-body, no parole laws, though it came too late for both families. This double conviction proved that justice can still win, even when a killer takes his darkest secrets to the grave. Still, the empty graves leave deep, permanent wounds that can never truly heal. While Bruce Burrell used trust as a weapon against vulnerable women, another Australian tragedy showed how resentment could simmer for years before erupting in violence that shook the community. Case 10. Michael Atkins, September 23, 2007. It began like any weekend on Oxford Street. Music blasted and lights flashed as crowds celebrated in one of Sydney's most energetic gay nightlife hubs. At 20, Matthew Leon was bubbly and energetic, working at an NRMA call center while building his life. He had been seeing Michael Atkins for a year, but their troubled relationship deeply worried those close to Matthew. Michael was 45, more than 2 decades older than young Matthew. An electrician, he had recently come out after a strict Catholic upbringing. His mother still did not know, and he carried that secret like a heavy weight. Those close to them saw Michael's dark, possessive streak. He watched exactly who Matthew talked to, growing furious whenever other men showed the slightest interest. Just days before, Matthew had confessed his growing frustrations to a trusted coworker. He complained that Michael demanded group sex with younger guys, but raged if anyone else spoke to Matthew, acting like God's gift. Matthew reportedly said he was completely done with the nonsense. That Saturday, the couple headed to ARQ nightclub in Darlinghurst, their usual weekend spot, typically staying until 5 in the morning. But around 2:15, Michael slipped out, later claiming he went to fetch more party drugs from his car. He texted Matthew, apologizing and saying he sold out and needed more gear. 15 minutes later, a major argument erupted. Matthew quickly messaged a friend, saying Mike was having a crying fit and was forcing him to leave early. Expressing his deep frustration, he sent another text saying Michael needed to get over himself. Those angry texts would be the final words anyone but Michael would ever receive from Matthew. Security footage captured them leaving the nightclub together at around 2 in the morning. Michael returned entirely alone an hour later, leaving a 55-minute gap that would haunt investigators forever. He stayed at the club until 5, then drove to the Chronically unit he shared with Matthew. Later that Sunday, around 12:20, security cameras at Bunnings Terran Point captured Michael buying a heavy mattock, along with heavy duct tape. When Matthew failed to show up for work on Monday, his worried parents reported him missing. Something was terribly wrong. On September 27th, detectives located Matthew's green Toyota Corolla, which was left abandoned at Warra Park Reserve in southern Thurland, a known local meeting spot. Inside the trunk, investigators found the Bunnings receipt for the mattock and duct tape covered in Michael's fingerprints. They also discovered that a speaker system had been taken from the trunk and moved into the couple's garage. The car's odometer revealed it had traveled a massive distance after Matthew vanished. When questioned on September 27th, Michael denied visiting Bunnings, claiming he spent a quiet Sunday afternoon at home with Matthew. He spun a story that Matthew had run away, perhaps fleeing to Thailand, marking the first of many lies. By mid-2008, the case became a murder investigation as detectives uncovered deeply disturbing patterns. These included Michael's extreme possessiveness and physical aggression. There was also their involvement in selling party drugs, including GHB, and Michael's highly inconsistent statements. In January 2008, police bugs recorded Michael admitting to Matthew's parents that he had lied about the Bunnings trip, claiming he bought the tools for a vegetable garden. On August 5, 2008, police arrested Michael Atkins and charged him with murder. The trial began in September 2009, built entirely on circumstantial evidence. This included the hardware purchases made right after the disappearance, the lies, and the abandoned car, plus the missing speakers and Michael's control. Yet vital evidence was kept from the jury, and Michael never took the stand. On October 20, 2009, the verdict was delivered. Not guilty of murder or manslaughter. Michael walked out of court a free man, claiming Matthew was still alive somewhere. Devastated, Marc and Faye Leon confronted the jurors, demanding to know what they were thinking. For nearly a decade, his grief-stricken parents refused to give up. Every weekend, Marc and Faye drove to the Royal National Park with shovels, searching vast areas of thick bushland. They sometimes searched at 2 in the morning to scout locations, returning in the daylight to dig properly. Their grief was relentless, and their determination was unbreakable. Meanwhile, Michael moved to Queensland, drifting from rental to rental, telling landlords he needed temporary housing after splitting from a fake wife. He worked as an electrician, kept a low profile, and was largely shunned, always looking over his shoulder. Then, in 2015, a coronial inquest reopened the case. Forced to testify, Michael refused to give straight answers, stubbornly sticking to his lies even under oath. The Levison family pushed for an immunity deal, hoping to force the truth in exchange for protection. In November 2016, New South Wales Attorney General Gabrielle Upton approved an unprecedented agreement. Michael would get immunity from perjury and contempt charges if he led police to Matthew's remains. The terms were clear: no body, no deal. On November 10, 2016, Michael finally confessed. He told police that Matthew had died from a GHB overdose at their Cronulla apartment after returning from ARQ. Instead of calling emergency services or attempting CPR, which he was trained to do, Michael panicked. He claimed he sat with the body for hours before buying a mattock and duct tape at Bunnings. Around midnight, under the cover of dark, he wrapped Matthew in a blanket. He cleared out his car's boot, removing the speaker system to fit Matthew's body inside. Driving south to Royal National Park, he pulled off McKell Avenue near a hairpin bend, carrying his partner's body into the thick bush. He dug a shallow grave, roughly 2 meters long and 80 centimeters deep, then buried the man he called his greatest love beneath a cabbage tree palm. Police began a massive search based on Michael's directions, but early searches in November and January found nothing. Michael even underwent hypnosis to try and recall the exact spot. He walked the park with detectives, drew diagrams, and even used a 70-kilogram mannequin to reenact his dark deed. Finally, on May 31, 2017, nearly 10 years after Matthew vanished, searchers uncovered skeletal remains beneath the palm tree. DNA testing confirmed they belonged to Matthew. Later, Marc and Faye replanted that very palm tree in their backyard as a living memorial. On December 5, 2017, Deputy State Coroner Elaine Truscott delivered her findings. She did not accept Michael as an honest witness, noting his testimony contained 72 lies. She found he had deliberately manufactured false evidence, including leaving voicemails on Matthew's phone begging him to come home, knowing full well he was already dead. However, because Matthew's remains were discovered over 9 years later, Heavy decomposition and excavation damage left forensic investigators unable to determine the cause of death. There was zero evidence supporting Michael's overdose story, but also nothing to prove any other cause. Ultimately, Magistrate Turcotte delivered an open finding, unable to rule how or why Matthew died. "I do not accept Mr. Atkins as a person of truth," she stated. "I regret that my findings cannot meet the family's hopes and expectations." She praised Marc and Faye for their tireless, decade-long search and devotion, recommending they receive official police commendations for secretly recording Michael in 2008 to capture his lies. Outside court, Mark Levison admitted that justice had been done, in a small way. "She named Michael Atkins over and over and over again," he said. But his final message to Michael was chilling. "You are no use to any of our family alive. Because of the deal, Atkins cannot be prosecuted for the death, perjury, or concealing the body. Today, he remains free, continuing his transient lifestyle in Queensland." At least Matthew's family finally held the funeral they had been denied for a decade. The case exposed major flaws in the original trial, where crucial evidence was withheld from the jury. It proved that legal acquittal doesn't mean innocence, and that families must make unbearable choices, granting immunity to someone they believe responsible just to bring their boy home. Matthew was buried beside the cabbage tree palm that had marked his hidden grave for 10 years, finally at rest.